welcome to the second Homebrew 101 episode. Woo! This one's a fairly stodgy one, to be honest. It's all about the equipment you'll need to start up in your personal homebrewing hobby. One of the most common questions that I get asked when I talk about homebrewing is that people are worried about the cost of actually making the alcohol. And you'll find with homebrewing, actually the main cost comes up into setting up the equipment. This initial cost is admittedly quite scary for some people. So I'm hoping today to kind of try and alleviate those fears somewhat and show what you basically need to start up and where you can get these things from. So this list is basically what you would need to start up making some beer or wine from like a beer kit. First thing you're going to need is a fermenter. Now what I mean by that is basically a plastic bucket, and that can be in different sizes. We currently have 3 of these and they're all at the 40 pint size. All of these will have a lid so you can seal whatever you're fermenting in the bucket, and some will have a hole at the top so you can fit an airlock into, and some also have a tap at the bottom so you can siphon off the beer or wine elsewhere. As they're normally plastic, they're easy to clean, so there's no real issues I've ever had in terms of actually getting them clean. Secondly is an airlock. These are really important, especially with wine. What they basically do is you half fill the chamber with water, and that will allow the CO2 that's formed in fermentation to vent off without actually exposing your beer or your wine to the air. You can get these in various different kind of designs, but they all do the same function. Thirdly is demijohns. A demijohn is normally a glass container. Sometimes you can get them in plastic. The general standard size for one, I believe, is a gallon, which is about 4.5 litres. They're really useful for fermenting wine in. We use ours to do our wine and mead in. I find it's also really useful to have at least 2 of these, because certainly with wine it's really useful to rack off, which is to mean to siphon off the wine from the sediment that's forming down the bottom, so that you're enabling it to be clearer. You can also get pressure barrels. Now these are an alternative to bottles. What I mean by that is when you're fermenting beer, at the end of the first fermentation stage, because you've got 2, you have to rack it off into bottles or a pressure barrel, and then prime the beer with more sugar, because essentially in the first stage of fermentation it's eating up all the sugar, and secondary fermentation is what will basically give it carbonation. Now we've never used our pressure barrel, we've got one, but some people say it's better than doing it in bottles, because when you're doing the secondary fermentation, that's where you're going to end up with sediment in the actual bottles. So when you actually come to drink the beer itself, you'll find you can't drink it out of the bottle anyway, and who would anyway, because that's just not classy. You'd have to avoid getting any of the sediment in the glass when you're pouring it, because it doesn't taste very nice. With the pressure barrel, you've got all of the 40 odd pints in that barrel, and you've got a tap right at the bottom which will enable you to pour straight into a glass without any disturbing of the sediment. You might have to inject CO2 into the top of the pressure barrel if it starts to become quite empty. To be honest though, I've not used mine yet. When I actually do, I'll learn how to properly do it, and then I'll show you how to do it. Siphons. Now siphons are plastic tubes that you are using to suck up the beer or wine out of the original container into another container. That could be another fermenter, demijohn, bottle, barrel. Basically you suck on one end, you make sure that the original container that you've got is a considerable height above the one that you're transferring into, because shockingly enough you need some form of gravity for the liquid to come from the bottom of the tube all the way into your bottle or barrel. Now some of these come with a little tap which you can turn off and on, so you can control the flow of the liquid that's being siphoned off. We've got one that's quite handy when you've got quite a large volume of alcohol to transfer, because if you've got quite a lot of bottles, you will find that you'll need to go woof, 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 quite a lot when you're actually siphoning into them. So it's useful to quickly go, flip off, get the next bottle, flip on. It just saves a lot of time and a lot of mess. Some of the siphon tubes will come with a sediment trap, which is just basically a little tiny square thing or a round thing at the bottom, and it will attach to the bottom of the tube where the original liquid is in, and it stops all the crap basically going into the container that you're siphoning into. Another very, very handy tool is a hydrometer. What that is a smallish device that looks a bit like a thermometer with a fat bottom. It's got lead or mercury shot on the bottom of the hydrometer, and what it does is it measures the specific gravity or relative density of the liquid compared to water. Now, alcohol is heavier than water, so this is really, really useful when you're wanting to know how alcoholic your content is. So you'd put it in when you start brewing, measure the reading on the hydrometer, and you would take a final reading when fermentation has finished. You can use a handy online calculator to figure out the alcohol content from there. You will need a thermometer. Why do you need a thermometer, you may ask? Well, you need to measure the temperature of the liquid certainly before you add the yeast in. Now, the yeast, for anyone who's not aware, is the tiny little organisms that eat all the sugar in your batch and turn it into alcohol. However, if you've got your temperature of the liquid too hot when you're putting yeast in, you're going to kill it. Which means no beer, which means a sad Emma. Now, some people actually have a thermometer that you can stick on the side of the fermenter, which are really useful. You can get them from a variety of shops. You're also going to need a bottle brush, really self-explanatory to be honest, for cleaning bottles. They're quite used for scrubbing fermenters as well. You're also going to need crown caps if you're bottling beer. What these basically are the little tiny metal things that have kind of got crimped edges, and they go on top of the beer, funnily enough. Various gadgets that you can use to attach these to your bottles. We've got one of the crank handle ones. Does require a little bit of elbow grease to get it on, but you can kind of have ones where you can lever it down. I don't know if they're any good or not. People can tell me if they are. If you're doing wine, it might be useful to have corks. Now, you can either invest in the proper corks where you can have a corking machine to get that on, or you can kind of use the stopper corks. We use those more than anything, to be honest. They can be reused. You need to make sure as always that they're sterilised before you put them in. And finally, I kind of want to mention the all-in-one starter kit. This is the kit that I first got when we started homebrewing. I'd say for anyone who wants to start making beer, it would actually be useful to have a look at these and see if it works out cheaper for you. It did work out cheaper for us to start off with like all of the equipment that we basically needed, apart from the bottles, that was. So that's kind of the start-up equipment that you need to think about getting. So what about where you can actually buy this stuff? Well, firstly, it will come as no surprise to know that you can get it online. I've got a lot of stuff from Amazon, the kind of like the sellers that go on there, and you can have a shop around on there or any other site, see what the cheapest deals are really. You can also, surprisingly enough, look in homebrew shops. People might be surprised, but you get them off Freecycle sites or Freegle. You'll see when you're on one of those mailing lists that people are always trying to offload stuff like that. So as with anything, check it out, see if it's of any use to you. Surprisingly enough, charity shops do sell some homebrew equipment sometimes. And garage or car boot sales, they do quite a lot of these as well. So, general do's and don'ts with regards to equipment. Don't be afraid to get second-hand equipment. We've got equipment from charity shops before. Do, however, be critical about the quality of the equipment. If it looks faulty or something wrong with it, just don't accept it at all. In the end, you're embarking on a hobby where you have to be very careful about making sure nothing's contaminated. So do reject equipment that's crap. However, with the equipment that you do have, always be careful with it. This is the type of equipment that could last for years and years and years, and it's nice to take care of that kind of stuff. As with anything that you do in homebrew, make sure everything is sterile and take advantage of sales. I've mentioned charity shops before, but some homebrew shops or the hardware shops that do homebrew sections do have sales quite a lot more than you think. We had a sale in the Easter time last year at a place called Wilkinson, and all of their stuff was half price. So I ended up making about 25 bottles worth of wine from the half price stuff, and I got some extra demijohns, and they're not too expensive to get, but those kind of things are really, really useful, especially if you're thinking about prices and worrying about how much it's going to cost. So my questions for you are, if you're a home brewer yourself, what other equipment would you recommend that I try? Are there any sources that I've not said that you think would be great places to get homebrew equipment? Have you actually tried to make your own homebrew equipment, and has it worked out? Leave your comments in the box below as always. Feel free to like, share, subscribe, feedback, check the Facebook page. And I hope this will start an army of homebrewers. Yay!